From OpenAI, please welcome Felipe Millon.
Thank you very much. Appreciate everyone being here. He warned me that it was going to be like a WWE intro, so I think that lived up to the hype. So my name is Felipe Millon. I have the pleasure of leading government sales, government go-to-market at OpenAI. And so was asked to do a little bit of career session. I get a lot of outreach and discussions about working in AI, how I got to where I got to. And so what I thought I would do is share a little bit of my career story. Share a little bit about what some tips I have whenever I speak with others that are interested in coming to the work in AI, and what some of my tips and tricks are in navigating and where maybe the opportunities will be. So I started my career off as an engineer. By the way, so no slides or anything, I'm just gonna chat, and then I'll leave some room for questions. So if you guys have questions burning, feel free to start thinking about them. So I started my career off as an engineer. Fun story is I did undergrad in industrial and systems engineering. I had gotten into a master's program for engineering, and so I was looking for a summer internship. And I went to a recruiting fair to find my summer internship. I had already had my master's, I was gonna go, lined up. And one of my friends of mine had interned at Lockheed Martin, and he's like, hey, come talk to the Lockheed Martin booth with me, get an internship there. Started talking with the recruiter, and she's like, oh, you're a senior? I was like, yeah, but I need an internship. I'm going to start graduate school in the fall. She said, well, why don't you come work for us and we'll pay for your master's? And I was like, that's a thing? I didn't know people could do that. And so started learning more about it, ended up applying to the University of Florida, had a outreach engineer management master's program taught in Orlando. I think I was the only person they at the time had ever accepted pending graduation, because they had applied to it while I was waiting for my job offer. I got both the job offer and into school. And so I said, all right, I'm going to do that instead of kind of going to my other master's program. So started off in engineering, worked in that world, got into a leadership program at Lockheed Martin where I rotated through a bunch of sites, did a bunch of amazing stuff. And then my wife actually had a phenomenal career opportunity herself. Throughout that time, I also got my MBA. And my wife had an awesome, amazing opportunity. If folks work in a dual career household, it's sometimes a big balance of like whose career is going to take precedence at what time. And she had been putting up with me and my traveling for my MBA program, a bunch of other stuff. And we said, you know what, your turn, let's go. And I thought I might want to do something outside of defense. And so I quit my job, nowhere else to go at the moment. I was just like, you know what, we'll move with her. Her job moved us to California. We moved to LA, and along the way, I found the job at a company called McMaster Car Supply Company, industrial supplier. Amazing experience, got me a lot of leadership experience. Did that for a few years. Then we had a family. We were going to start having a family, so we wanted to move back to South Florida, where we're originally from. So I once again just quit my job. Her job moved us to Florida, and Amazon would happen to be launching in Miami a new initiative. It was actually a fun story. When I interviewed with Amazon, there was just a very vague job posting for this role in Miami, Florida. At the time, Amazon had no warehouse, no office building, no presidents whatsoever in South Florida, and here's this very vague job. And I had a friend for business school. He's like, I'll refer you in. I went through 8 rounds of interviews at Amazon, no idea what the job was. They just kept telling me, new initiative, we'll tell you more as you get through. Ended up, getting a job offer at Amazon, happened to be to launch what would become Prime Now, the ultra-fast delivery business, which later merged with Amazon Fresh. Did that for a few years, and then found an opportunity to move to AWS. And so internally started researching about AWS, and Amazon had broken out the financial statement for AWS for the first time. And I ran the P&L for an ultra-fast delivery business that sold everyday consumable items. So when I say I ran a P&L, I ran an L, a very, very large loss leader, and we're trying to make it marginally profitable. Anyways, moved to AWS and started working in cloud and learning about cloud computing and working with the federal government around cloud. And then November of 2022, ChatGPT comes out, hits the world, and I became absolutely obsessed. Every moment I was like, how does this thing work? What's going on? People may remember there's a big Wolfram Alpha article about like 80 pages that came out about like the inner details about how these models worked. And so started learning that, every single paper I could on archive, and just started digging into what was going on in AI. And then so what I started doing was, from a career perspective, trying to see within AWS, where can I start transitioning what I'm doing myself into what I was very interested in. So just started raising my hand and volunteering for more things that were related to AI, and just jumping more and more into how could I start using AI. One of my biggest tips for getting into this world is the number one thing you have to do is be a power user of AI. If you actually want to work in AI, there is going to be no substitute for being a user of AI. And so that's what I had really embraced. And so there's a quote I love and also hate, which is, you do not get fit by reading about working out. you have to go to the gym. And in the world of AI, going to the gym is using AI. So there's a lot of tools out there. I am extremely biased, and I think ChatGPT is the best, and you should all use that. But if you want to go use Claude, if you want to use Gemini, if you want to use Grok, you should really use them all. And I use them all the time. I have personal subscriptions to all of them. Even before I started working for OpenAI, I had, again, personal subscriptions across all of them. And really, the best way to understand this technology and where it's going is by being a user of it. So really, that's what I started doing within Amazon and becoming a big user of this technology myself. So I started using Amazon services. So Amazon came out with a Bedrock product, which is kind of their model. So just dove in, started understanding what that technology was doing, how that worked, and just started to become a subject matter expert and learning more about it and raising my hand, finding opportunities to do that in the space that I worked in. And then how could I start branching out to even other areas once I had developed that expertise. An interesting role about thinking about careers and the role that luck plays. Does anyone by chance follow a woman, an AI influencer named Ali Miller? Do folks know that name? A handful of folks. So Ali is an AI influencer. She's actually, if you don't follow her, you should. She's writes a lot about AI and specifically around business. You follow her on X or LinkedIn. And so I had followed her, just I was learning about the space and understanding more. And I happened to be traveling to New York from DC on the Acela train. And I sit down, and in a assigned seat next to me sits Ali. And I looked at her, and I was like, that's Ali Miller. And I leaned over, and I was like, apologize. In a non-creepy way, I follow you. And we ended up talking about AI on a 3-hour train ride, amazing conversation, stayed in touch, met again at a couple conferences and events. And so I was working with, again, Amazon doing AI work, and one day out of the blue, Ali sends me a message and says, hey, would you be interested in OpenAI? They're about to start a federal team, and you would be perfect for it. And so I share that story because of the role that luck plays in kind of career transitions and kind of the immunity and the importance of creating a network. You never know at what point, like when I was talking to Ali, I never knew that it was because I was a specific job. It was just in the orbit and the field that I wanted to be in, and so we wanted to have those conversations. So from there, started at OpenAI, and so now, again, lead government go-to-market. So my role today is to work with government agencies and get them to adopt artificial intelligence. So we have a ChatGPT enterprise product. We have our APIs. We also have a partnership with Microsoft where they make our technology available in a direct way themselves. But really, how do we actually get the government to start using this technology themselves? So that's a little bit about my personal career journey. I mean, I think the big takeaways are, again, one is I acknowledge it, the importance of luck plays, but it's also, there's the quote, the harder I work, the luckier I am. And so it's getting yourself positioned and to be in the right place at the right time and have the right levels of experience. So again, for me, wanting to be in the artificial intelligence world, that was, what my wife would tell you, the obsession of reading every single archive paper and trying to use every single AI tool that existed and really start learning about it. I am very, very much off the deep end here when it comes to AI and what I think the potential is and where I think we're going. So, so I'm maybe a little bit more of an extreme case in terms of like how far I took it in terms of learning, adopting it. But again, depending on if you want to work more in the space, that's one of the biggest recommendations I'll have about how do you actually just really start embracing. The reality of it is this technology is moving so fast. In about 30 minutes, OpenAI is doing a webinar about our business products, and you're going to hear about all sorts of new launches and stuff that we're doing today. And so, again, if you're interested in that, feel free to, it's going to be live streamed on YouTube. There is a pace of innovation going on, which is absolutely relentless. Again, both by OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, XAI, et cetera. One thing I would highly recommend, again, my personal opinion, again, take it with all of the bias that it comes with, is the importance in the AI world of staying close to the foundational model providers. There's a lot of people that are building some amazing technology on top of AI, but the reality is you also have to understand what is happening truly at the ground level. And so from my perspective, that is the people building these frontier AI systems. So again, and then what I would recommend is start using those frontier systems. There's going to be a tremendous amount of now applied AI opportunity where you can take these tools from different companies and build, right? Whether you look around all the amazing companies that are here today that are building technology for specific use cases, leveraging the foundational technology. One of the most critical things is I think you have to understand that fundamental level in order to really understand what is happening here. You can't just be a user of AI because it showed up in your, whether it be, I'm looking at the Google logo, like Gmail, or inside of your Slack, or inside of whatever tools you use. Every single tool, in our belief, and my belief personally, is going to be embedded with AI. I think we're at a moment where we were when it was 2007, 2008, if folks remember, like post-iPhone, where every company in Silicon Valley was a mobile company. Everybody was a mobile this, mobile that. Today, Uber is not a mobile transportation company. Airbnb is not a mobile accommodations company. They're just an accommodations company or a transportation company. And of course they have a mobile app because it's 2025, and of course you would have a mobile app. I believe personally that the same thing is going to happen in AI. Today, if you go to Silicon Valley, one of the biggest winners of AI is a small island nation because the .ai domain is owned by the island of Antigua. And so all of these companies that are buying, blank.ai are all paying Antigua for the ability to use that domain. And so that everybody's trying to brand themselves as an AI company and do this AI. What I think will strongly happen is everybody will be AI by default. AI is just going to be enabled into every single piece of technology you use will just have technology and AI enabled in it. So you're going to see it. If you think it's bad now that everything is AI already, it's just going to continue to progress even more. And the reality is because there's so much value, you're able to create so much value by embedding AI into these tools and helping humans. And so I think the future, there's a lot of people who will predict what exactly is going to happen to whether it be jobs, careers, different things. I don't think anybody can tell you exactly what's going to happen. What we can tell you is for sure is there is going to be change. There is going to be disruption. And the people who I think that will succeed are the people who can fastest adopt to that. And that's the agility and the importance of being agile and learning. So I think the number one thing I would give, as advice again, as part of the career stage is start learning AI. If you have not used ChatGPT or Grok, Gemini, et cetera, in the last 24 hours, you are falling behind. You need to start using it for every single thing and start, because again, you have to be at the frontier of understanding where these things do well and where they break down. These models fail in really interesting ways. Then everybody has their moment of like the mind-blown moment of I cannot believe an AI model did that. And then you ask another question, you're like, I cannot believe the thing that can do all this amazing work cannot get this right. And there's all sorts of silly things. And so there's actually a paper that was written by another great guy to follow if you want to learn a lot about the space, is a professor out of Wharton called Ethan Mullick. He wrote a great book called Co-Intelligence. He writes an amazing blog called One Useful Thing. So Ethan, Professor Mullick, wrote a paper where he talks about the jagged frontier of AI systems. And what he started showing was these models are incredible and they're absolutely superhuman in many, many domains, but they're also subhuman in many other domains. And the issue is you don't know exactly where that is. Even the model providers don't know exactly where that is until we start using an expertise about all these different areas. And so really the way that you start getting expertise is by using a model and start doing it in the domains you know. So maybe the last point I'll mention on kind of maybe some just general career advice as it relates to AI, and then I'm happy to pause, take a bunch of questions, is the importance of understanding what your angle is to try to navigate into the AI world. And what I mean by that is I'm in a very fortunate place that in a very a great company, and I get a lot of outreach and folks that are reaching out to me and saying, I want to learn about AI, I want to learn this, et cetera. But the question that you have to think about is, well, why you and for what area? And so when I think about my career, for example, I made a lot of big jumps myself. I went from Lockheed Martin as an engineer to a general manager of an industrial supply company to then Amazon, where I was a general manager of a ultra-fast delivery business, to then AWS sales go-to-market in the public sector. And the way I made a lot of these jumps was trying to actually keep things as consistent as possible. So for example, when I moved from McMaster Car Supply Company to Amazon, it was actually to do same warehouse management type jobs I had been doing before. And so that made sense when I talked to a recruiting or a hiring manager to say, why you? And it was because I've already been doing something similar to this. And when I moved from Amazon Prime Now to AWS, it was a very big jump because I went from, again, the consumer side of Amazon to now AWS, very technical. And so I had to answer a question, well, why you? And so I had to go back and lean in. Well, I've worked with the public sector. So I worked at Lockheed Martin. I know working and contracting with the US government. I know Amazon really well, and I know the culture, and that was really important for Amazon. It has a very strong culture. And I was like, I don't know tech sales, but I can learn it. And here I've actually mitigated that risk because I've already got my AWS cloud certifications and I've shown I can do this. And so it's that ability to keep certain things the same that made it the same way. Similarly, when I started moving to AI, I was covering the federal financial team for AWS. And so within the federal financial team, I just became the AI expert and started learning about AI. And so it was very clear that I could be the financial services, federal financial guy for AI. And so I started navigating that way. And then once I was doing that, I became a little bit more of a subject matter expert across broader public sectors. Well, now that I've done AI there, how can I leverage AI here? So especially for those of you maybe earlier in your careers, definitely think about those touch points and what to keep the same. And like from a hiring manager perspective, someone you're reaching out to, think like, why you? What is your angle? And so whether it be, you currently work in healthcare, and maybe you work at an agency, I'll pick like NIH or something like that. So don't say, okay, well, I want to go do AI for defense use cases is maybe a big jump, but I can use AI for healthcare. How can you keep as much of the same? A lot of times when people are thinking about career transitions, they think about where they want to be. I would think about that with the lens, how do you think about where you want to be, but changing as little as possible? So because again, you really wanted to answer the question, why you, why at this moment? So again, that will really help as you start transitioning. Again, AI is also so early that find ways to become a power user, find ways to create expertise and start showing that, whether that be, again, my biggest advocation there is to be a user of this technology, be a power user, but then go take courses, go take certification programs. Ourselves and all the other AI providers have free courses available online. There's paid certifications you can probably do as well. Those are a little bit more, those may be valuable. I'm not necessarily advocating for those. There's a lot of free out there. If you really want to stay close to AI, the way that AI is moving today is X/Twitter. Like that's where the vast majority of AI researchers, people publishing, are posting information to stay up to speed. And podcast is another great way to stay up to speed. So there's a lot of AI podcasts that are summarizing what's happening. The reality is a lot of the other traditional methods of following traditional published research or even books and articles or certification courses are all too slow for the pace of innovation in this world. So that's where you're seeing things, rightfully or wrongfully, move a little bit more towards the faster publishing methods of like podcasts, and like my Twitter and XAI feed are probably like the way that I get the most up-to-date information about what's happening in this space. But again, the number one way is by using it. So Anthropic published just last week their Sonnet 4 models and Opus 4. Like number one thing I did is that when those were released, I was personally using those to understand, okay, what does it work well for? What does it actually use for? Another thing that maybe in a similar vein that I would also think for advice that I give every single company, organization I talk to, but also I think individually, is one of the, I think, biggest pieces that is missing in the AI world is evaluations, so evals. So how does it work for your specific use case? And it actually goes back to understanding what are the things you know well. So for example, I'm looking, Lindsay over here is a journalist, and so using AI for journalism. How do you know whether the new OpenAI releases GPT-5, I'm not making an announcement, but like we release GPT-5 next week. How do we know that GPT-5 is better for journalism than Opus 4 or Grok 3? And really the only way is by having a set of evaluation criteria on what does it work well. And so having almost your own personal benchmarks and evaluations so that Lindsay has an article is like, all right, well, here's the articles that I had, here's my sample prompts, et cetera, and I have a collection of them so that when a new model comes out, I know very quickly, is this better or worse than what I have? So having your own personal benchmarks or trials is a really way to start getting ahead and start building that. If you want to really start adding a lot of value, start creating that for the industry or the specific section that you are. So again, going back to healthcare, what are the healthcare benchmarks? What are the things that you know in healthcare? Or maybe you're in defense. What are the defense application benchmarks? And understanding when these models are better than others and being able to have a little bit more rigor around that is going to be super important. So again, as just a personal piece of advice, I think is a very missing area across all organizations, but even across individuals. So how do you evaluate? In the AI world, you hear a lot of people talk about vibes-based evaluation. So people talk about the vibes of this model, or you even hear like more looser terms like this model has a big model smell. Like people actually say things like that, which is like, we don't know exactly how to quantify that this model is better than this other one. Why GPT-5 is going to be better than GPT-4, or why O3 is better than O1. But the way you get it is by being a user and seeing it and testing it, and it's by using them repeatedly and then having that moment of like, I can't exactly put my finger on it, but I know when I asked this one prompt, it was resolving better. So I'm starting to trust this model a little bit more than the other. And so that is kind of the world we live in today, where it's very vibes-based, but the more rigor we start putting around that to say, all right, well, here's actually benchmark evaluations. Here are the benchmarks for what an AI model looks like in an IT manager capacity, and for using it for managing an IT fleet, or for using it for, again, for healthcare, for DoD, or for intelligence applications. But like, figure out that area, that industry that you work in, and then figure out how would you evaluate a model for that. And so that is, again, an area that I would highly recommend everyone spend some time doing it. Very biased, use our stuff to go try it, but compare it to all the other models as well. So hopefully this was somewhat helpful to understand a little bit about kind of at least my perspective on careers. Happy to pause here and take any questions that anyone has about either career, OpenAI, or anything there. So the question was about aspiring tech sales, graduating soon, and what would my recommendation be on what to do to do that world. I think a few different things that I'll say. One, more generically, is kind of what I said now is I would be the #1 power user of AI. Like, I would be the #1 tech sales AI enabled rep by far. And again, and it's understanding and staying at the frontier and the cutting edge. Once you start getting into a company, you got to follow their rules and process what tools they make available. I would definitely recommend that. But especially when you're on your own early on, seeing what does tech sales look like with these models. #1 thing I would ask, if you haven't, ask the models. Go to ChatGPT and ask ChatGPT, hey, I'm going into tech sales, or I would aspire to, what could I do? I would highly suggest play with the frontier of these models. Again, find ways to get access. Some access the labs like ourselves make open for free on some of the free tiers. Some you have to pay, whether it's a $20 a month, et cetera. But I would go use O3, for example, our newest reasoning models, and ask it to build you a plan on how can I become the best AI-enabled tech sales rep, and have it kind of go through. And really start pushing on using AI as much as possible in all sorts of different ways. Pair that with traditional learning and traditional tech sales processes. Find networks and evaluations of people who are doing it. Find meetup communities of people. We're at a very interesting time where people are creating a lot of communities and trying to share what's happening in AI in many different fields. And so find those communities of interest, and that's a lot of the ways you get to network. I'll share one thing, like, I get a lot of cold reach out on LinkedIn and others on like, hey, can you chat with me, et cetera. I would love to chat with as many people, and it's actually one of the pain points that I have is I just cannot spend enough time given the volume that I have myself. But I'll share a little bit about maybe the ones that do get through are normally personal connections. So it's someone says, someone's just not, hey, I saw you and interested in chatting, but it's just like, hey, I'm very good friends with Renzo who's here, and Renzo personally vouched for me, or Renzo made an introduction, right? Those tend to be a little bit in a different caveat. So again, when you're trying to navigate, especially like if you're trying to look for a tech job sales role, find the personal connections, like really grow your network, build things, and then try to see like where you can navigate through a network. That will be a good job for tech sales, a good skill to have in tech sales anyways. But that's definitely one aspect I would recommend. But really, so I guess the big thing I would say is find the community of tech sales and find the area that you want to be in, and then become an AI power user for that area. And so I think that applies to tech sales, but it really applies to anything that anyone's doing here.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Millon.
Yeah. Yeah, great question. So the question was, he is from Europe. There's a lot of concerns about AI energy use, and so sometimes as a power user, he gets pushed back to say, I don't want to use these models as much because they are consuming electricity, and maybe they're showing some figures around, here's what they are. Again, take this all with a giant grain of sand, given like what I'm representing in my background and kind of my personal viewpoints. There is no hiding that these tools, AI in general, is very, very energy hungry. Right, there's a reason the Secretary of Energy is going to be speaking, I think, in like an hour here on one of the stages. And the energy is such a big part. If you listen to the Trump administration talk about AI, one of the big things they talk about is energy. These models are incredibly energy intensive. That being said, I do think there is potentials to apply AI itself to the energy problem itself. So we, for example, at OpenAI are doing a lot of work with the national labs, with the US national labs, and really trying to see, for example, Lawrence Livermore National Labs has been around here today. They spoke at a couple panels yesterday. They are really working on creating fusion. They've created fusion in a laboratory where they have more energy going into, or less energy going in that is coming out of a fusion operation, which is absolutely magical. And they're saying they're rapidly able to adopt even faster because of AI. So I think the way I would answer your colleagues in Europe that are maybe concerned about it is first acknowledging the concerns. Like, it is a very true concerns, but I think the upside are even bigger. And sometimes some of that is by the anecdotes and the stories are more powerful. I'm going to share a very, very personal story that we've shared publicly, and you'll understand why in a second. So my wife and I are battling breast cancer. So my wife 6 months ago was diagnosed with bilateral breast cancer. And we've been using AI the whole way as a partner to help navigate that journey for us. A couple of quick examples. When my wife received her biopsy report to say, like, you had cancer, she got an alert in the platform before her doctor called. So before her doctor called her, she got an alert, here's your biopsy results back. And so she gets this very, very medical document. And so the first thing she thought to do is, like, I'm going to put this into ChatGPT, and I'm going to help it decode. I'm going to help it explain to me in plain English what this means and understands what it is. Obviously, very emotional time. Actually, ChatGPT is who told me my wife had cancer for the first time, because my wife was very emotional, as you would expect. And I came upstairs, she couldn't even speak. She handed me the biopsy report on her phone. I started reading, I was like, I don't understand what's going on. And through the tears, she was able to say, I already put it into ChatGPT and then flipped it to the app. And ChatGPT is who explained kind of what the diagnosis was to me. It is not a replacement for our care, but when our doctor called 2 hours later, 3 hours later, we were much more prepared. We were ready to fight. We had already transitioned from, like, understanding mode to, like, what are we doing here? What are the next steps? What do we need to go? What's our process going to be here? Another example of what we've used in our care is when my wife, one thing I did not know ahead of time is chemotherapy is not like a one-size-fits-all. It is very customized, and it's actually more of an art of what type of chemo drugs you'll get for what type of care. And so when post-surgery, she had a double mastectomy, we got back the surgical pathology reports. We sat down with our oncologist to review the reports and what we were going to do for her care and her treatment. Our doctor and our medical team are incredible, and she sat down and she explained, we're going to do this TCHP treatment, and here's why. She had bilateral, so this is targeting this is targeting this, here's what we're going to do, here's what the effects are, et cetera. Like, long, great discussion. She explained it. We're like, that sounds great. Let's do that. She said, all right, let me put in the order. And she swiveled in her chair, started typing up her notes, and got an error back from the insurance. And swiveled back to us and said, you know what, actually, we're not going to do this last one. And she turned on the paper, she had just handwritten, and crossed out the last drug. And she's like, look, it was actually marginal, and here's why. These other ones are covering it. We actually don't need it. And then we ended up wrapping up the appointment. That moment stuck with my wife. And so we said, it's something didn't feel right. So what did she do? She goes to ChatGPT, and she's like, tell me about this drug. Tell me about this drug. Here's my pathology report. Why would this drug be recommended for my case? And went through and had a whole conversation with ChatGPT about the drug, what was happening, why she should push. And at the end of it, ChatGPT said, yes, most oncologists would recommend, in your case, for this type of cancer, this specific drug be part of your treatment. I know how these things work, and in a decision like this, I do not blindly trust ChatGPT. So my brother is a pediatrician in Florida. He has a colleague that worked in oncology. And so we called his oncologist friend, talked to him in Florida, and gave him the situation. He said, yep, that's exactly what I would do as well. So she goes back to ChatGPT and says, write an email to my doctor explaining why I want to revisit this decision. Sends the email to her doctor. We said, let's chat next week. We meet, and the doctor's like, you know what? You're right. It was my instinct to give you that drug. We weren't able to, insurance blocked it, but let's file an appeal. This is borderline. I wouldn't necessarily pay for this out of pocket. More of the story is my wife, 2 weeks ago, just had her last round of chemotherapy with that drug. So again, and I share that story, thank you, because I think of to your point back of, like, when people push back on a very serious concern around, like, energy and other things, I try to share those upsides. Like, this was a story where my wife, had we not had these tools, will tell you directly, she did not have the agency to advocate for herself like that. She could not have advocated. And so this tool is allowing and empowering humans in a way that I think we're just scratching the surface. And so there are real concerns here, but I would not limit it, the upside potential, because of those concerns. We need to address them. We need to think about them. We need to focus. We need to, whether it be clean energy or others. But the upside here is so powerful that just saying I'm not going to use them is not the solution. Right, thank you.
Special thank you to Felipe Millon. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have.